Hello, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. This is actually episode 13 because the Mass was broken up into two parts, 10 and 11. Within the same spirit of the Mass, before we get off of that topic, what I wanted to discuss is the actual sacred vestments and the Mass, what they call the Mass implements. um, I know my liturgical nerd side is showing, but the both the implements and the vestments provide a very visual expression of the Mass, but also tie us back to our Jewish roots in the faith, right? So the Judeo-Christian religion that we have in the Catholic Church. So what you what you need to know is that the sacred vestments are this visual expression of the clergy's role in the Mass, right? For the priest, the vestments show him as what they say the in persona Christ, right? Or in the person of Christ during the liturgy, because what the priest is doing through the entire Mass is representing Christ, right? So it's that beautiful sacrament of holy orders that the priest takes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the vestments, and I'm going to try to provide a picture so that you know exactly what I'm talking about. So to begin with, and we'll kind of do this in alphabetical order, there's what they call the amice. It's that white linen cloth covering the neck and shoulders. This is recalling that the Roman soldiers used to blindfold Jesus while they beat him. Most people didn't know that. So that doesn't draw back to the Jewish faith, but it's the direct result of Christ's passion and death, right? The next is the alb. It's the long white linen robe. It's signifying innocence. It recalls the transfiguration when Jesus was clothed in garments white as snow, as they said, as well as the white robe he was clothed in while Herod reviled him. The next is the girdle or the cincture. It's a white cord that clinches the alb at the waist, and so it symbolizes the purity. The cord also recalls the rope that tied Jesus to the column as he was being scourged. So it's overall that binding of Christ. Next is the maniple. Now, it's sometimes confused. I know that when I was an altar boy and the priest would refer to this, I would confuse it with the alb. I don't know why. But the maniple is a length of cloth hung over the left arm, symbolizing several things: the chains that bound Jesus' hands, the burden of sin, and the fatigue of the priestly service, of the priestly life. It developed from a handkerchief type cloth, which Saint Alphonsus Liguori noted was often needed by priests to wipe away their tears, believe it or not, during the celebration of the Mass. Then there's the stole, a cloth hanging around the neck, crossing over the chest, recalling the robe tied around Jesus that led him through the streets of Jerusalem during his crucifixion. Kind of jumped over one of the alphabetical orders here. The chasuble, which is the outer robe, this is symbolizing the royal robe thrown over Jesus by the Roman soldiers as they mocked him and crowned him with thorns. It is usually ornamented with a column and cross type design, recalling Jesus' scourging at the column and his crucifixion. When a priest prays as he vests, he speaks of the chasuble as the yoke of Christ, right? Now, years ago, the religious nuns and sisters usually handmade these. Some of the faithful, who were very good tailors, would also provide these as gifts. If you ever wanted to get an idea the cost behind these vestments, if there's few of these type religious garment stores available. There's one still in existence in Chicago that a lot of priests come to, and they provide these vestments. They are not cheap, because the amount of tailoring that goes into them. I can actually talk about the cassock that the traditional priest wears as well, and that is that long black robe that they wear. You'll see this more in the traditional faiths, but that's worn just when they are out and about, so to speak. It is not worn during the Holy Mass. Okay, so now let's get into the implements. There's the saborum. Saborum is a Latin word for food container, believe it or not. The saborum holds the consecrated hosts and is kept inside the tabernacle on the altar. This is why when we come into a church, the first thing we should do is genuflect, make the sign of the cross, because the saborum holds the consecrated hosts. So that's Christ ever present at the altar, and that's why you don't talk when you walk into church. That's why you should teach your children to always show reverence. Today, what you'll see in more of the Novus Ordo masses, they'll make all this noise, and then all of a sudden they'll get up to the foot of the altar, and then they'll bow real quick and move away. So somewhere the priest has told them Christ is there, you know. All right, next is the paten, right? The paten is used by the priest to hold and carry the hosts. In the ancient times, the paten held bread offerings from the lay faithful. The paten must be gold or golden plated, and it must be shallow. You've seen it during communion. While it may be engraved or otherwise provided with an ornament on the outside, it must be perfectly smooth on the inside. And the reason is that you don't want it to be corruptible. It should be able to be cleaned very easily by the priest. And then the reason for the gold, of course, is because it's holding the body of Christ. So it's got to be the most precious metal. Then there's the chalice. So the chalice holds the wine consecrated at Mass. During the Roman Empire, the chalice was the cup of the household, is what it was called, and was often made of a precious metal with inlaid stones on the outside of it. Now, it must be consecrated, and it may not be handled by anyone other than the priest without special permission given. Most people don't know that. So it has to be, the special permission has to be given by the priest to religious or others qualified to tend the sacristy. This is why the sacristanian or the person over the sacristy is usually the only one given that permission. It's that important. And by the way, the sacristy, we all know, is the room behind the altar where the priests and the altar boys prepare for Mass, and where the priest actually robes. It must be made of gold as well, or of silver with a gold-plated interior. The interior must be smooth, just like the paten, right? So it can be easily cleaned, and you'll see the priest cleaning it. Then there's the cruets. These are the small bottles used to hold the unconsecrated water and wine. And when I was an altar boy, when I was first an altar boy, I was always afraid I was going to drop one of these. And sure enough, I did. They're made of crystal. Very important. Then there's the corporal. It's the oldest of the altar linens. It is the size of a large napkin and is under the chalice, the paten, and the saborum during the Mass. it's folded into ninths, and they're carefully refolded from the corners inward to prevent any sacred species from falling, right? It is usually adorned with a red cross. The traditional Mass, you'll notice the priest takes great care to make sure no part of the consecrated body is lost or falls to the ground. All right, then there's the pall. It's a small stiffened linen napkin looking, used to keep foreign matter out of the chalice. We then have the purificator, which is a small napkin used for wiping the chalice and the paten. So these are the implements at the altar. I'm going to stop here. This is a very short video, but once again, if you ever really want to appreciate all of this, attend a traditional Mass, and if you're just doing it as more of an educational process, I don't think it would be wrong for you to visit the sacristy and ask the sacristanian or the priest if they would mind if you actually looked at them, saw them up close and personal, because a lot of the faithful never get that close. But again, you have to ask permission to do that. And that's it for this episode, and thank you very much, and I will see you in the next episode, which what I'd like to discuss, even though we went through all the parts of the Mass, I would like to discuss those bigger pieces of the Mass, like what do they represent. I went through all the parts of it, but I want to explain to you what does the Mass represent. And it's a more concentrated edition, so it shouldn't take too much time. But thank you very much.